Good evening. I'll call this meeting of the Housing Authority for the City of Salem for Monday, August 23rd, 2021 to order. If the recorder will please call the roll.
Vice Chair Stapleton.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Phillips.
Here.
Commissioner Leung.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Chair Hoy.
Here.
Commissioner Nordike.
Here.
Commissioner Lewis.
Here.
Thank you, and if you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Vice Chair Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
We do not.
Thank you. I see we have nobody signed up for public comment. Vice Chair Stapleton, the consent calendar.
Yeah, I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Anderson, who we had just
Great to
heard
see.
for the first time. Excellent.
All right. The consent calendar consists of three things tonight. We have item 3.1A, which is the July 26, 2021 draft Salem Housing Authority minutes. Item 3.3A, amendments to the Salem Housing Authority's 2021 through 2025 Public Housing Agency Plan and Annual Capital Fund Plan. And item 3.3B, which is the revised Section 8 Administrative Plan. And that concludes the consent calendar.
Excellent. Any discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. I see we have no public hearings and no special orders of business, but we do have some information reports. I believe we have Ms. Utes here available to us tonight. Do you have any questions or comments on information reports? Or Ms. Utes, do you have any comments you'd like to make first?
Bennett does come to us with lived experience, both in being homeless and a household of drug addiction. Bennett's been a great asset to our team. He's been out in the field numerous times. He comes with a great personality, and he's looking forward to being out there at the homeless camps and helping assist others. So on top of that, I just also wanted to notice that we have almost fully leased up all of our housing, especially with our newly renovated rental assistance demonstration conversions, which have turned into 4 beautiful apartment complexes. Those are now 100% leased. The one thing I did want to note is that you'll notice that our numbers in our senior complexes have dropped a bit. This last month, we did have a series of deaths in our senior properties, which is very unfortunate. We do have many seniors that age in place. And so currently we're quickly turning those back over, but that is the reason for the decline in those.
Thank you for sharing that unfortunate news about the recent deaths. I appreciate hearing that. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoy. You may have said something about this, Ms. Utes, but I've been having trouble with my sound. You talked about 4 new projects in your report, agenda item 3.3A. I'd love to have you explain a little bit about what these projects are and how they're helping folks who need housing on all ends of the spectrum. Thanks.
Yes, so in the item that you're listed is actually our project-based voucher program. And over this last year, we did have 3 applicants come in for project-based vouchers and have been awarded those. So you will see in the information, it lists the 27th Avenue apartments, which will allow for 8 project-based vouchers in a 96 total unit community. This building received low-income fast-track funding for its commitment to serving low-income Latinx families. This project will have a series of services on site via Mano Mano. These services will provide food, assistance, resource, navigation, community health, parenting support, and social justice services. The location of this is in Ward 3. We also awarded Gateway, which is a 56 project-based vouchers out of 178 total units. This community is still seeking its full funding through various sources such as 4% and 9% low-income tax credits. It will be an integrational building serving families and seniors. There will be on-site services which will provide access to multi-generational activities, fostering a mentorship environment for youth and fostering relationships for seniors. This building provides life-enhancing housing that focuses on long-term community engagement. We've also awarded project-based vouchers to Center for Hope and Safety for Hope Plaza as well.
Thank you, Ms. Utes. Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none and seeing no further business before the Housing Authority, we are adjourned.
It went off again. Can you just throw out the piano for a minute? So
Ready? Call this meeting of the Salem City Council for Monday, August 23rd to order. If the recorder would please call the roll.
Counselor Stapleton.
Here.
Counselor Anderson.
Present.
Counselor Phillips.
Here.
Counselor Leung.
Here.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Here.
Counselor Hoy.
Here.
Counselor Nordyke.
Here.
Counselor Lewis.
Here.
Mayor Bennett.
Here. Counselor Hoy, any additions or deletions?
No.
Okay. Okay, this is opportunity for the council to, counselors who have any comments? Counselor Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett. Okay, it's been quite a day. Frontline healthcare workers like myself need your help. We need your help to protect kids under 12 who can't yet get vaccinated. We need your help to protect immunocompromised community members. We need your help to make sure that our healthcare system continues to have capacity to care for everyone, and conditions like heart attack, sepsis, serious trauma, strokes, and surgical emergencies. Recently, a group of 49 healthcare providers in Eugene wrote a letter to the community imploring everyone who could to get vaccinated. In the letter, they wrote, "You may feel that you are safe. We have cared for and admitted many patients who have had this very thought. This is not only about you, it is about the greater good of our community. We cannot keep fighting this fight without your help." Outside the letter, today Oregon set another record. Currently, there are 937 patients with COVID-19 admitted statewide. This is a 50% increase from our last city council meeting 2 weeks ago, which is a 50% increase from the record set during the winter surge. We've had over 2,100 patients per day get ill with COVID-19 during the last week. This average is now higher than the one-day record from the winter surge. ICUs are 93% full across the state. Statewide, we're literally running out of space in hospitals, and we urgently need your help. How can you help? Utilize the safe and effective vaccines that prevent illness from COVID-19. Wear a mask when going out indoors to public spaces. And, these actions protect you, your loved ones, and everyone in our community. What do I say to people who've been waiting for full FDA approval prior to getting the shot? As of today, the Pfizer COVID vaccine is now fully FDA approved for ages 16 and up. This milestone approval is based on a rigorous 6-month review of over 44,000 clinical trial participants. 6-month data shows that the vaccines remain 91% effective at preventing symptomatic illness after 6 months. Bottom line, rigorous science and clinical data support full FDA approval. Vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are free and widely available. Getting vaccinated can literally save your life and the life of your loved ones. Please act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to just share some personal information that I'm not normally inclined to share, but I feel like it's relevant to share tonight. Over the past 5 weeks or so, I've had 2 different hospital stays and 2 different surgeries unrelated to COVID, thank goodness. But I had a spine surgery, and then I had a subsequent infection that required a second surgery. And so I've been mostly out of commission for city business for about the last 4 to 5 weeks. And I just want people to be aware of that. That's the reason why I may not have been as communicative or as active as I normally would be. I think one thing that's important to know, when you're on the Salem City Council, you're it. You don't have staff, you don't have people reading your email, returning your phone calls. When I'm not available, I'm not available, and there's nobody picking up the slack. And so I apologize for any of the emails I haven't responded to, or phone calls, or the like. Now, that all being said, I have been aware of some things happening out here in my ward, specifically the actions out on Wolverine at Planned Parenthood by various groups. And I have to tell you, I'm really upset about it on several levels. There are protests by a so-called church at Planned Parenthood. The Proud Boys have shown up, the Black Bloc has shown up. There have been all sorts of groups showing up out here to apparently get their message across, whatever that may be. But what I want people to understand is this isn't like having a protest at the state capitol, okay? Which is a public property, which is equipped to handle that kind of situation. This is a neighborhood. This is right where a commercial and a residential area interface. This is literally an apartment building's backyard, quite a large complex's backyard. And people are protesting and having bear spray fired right outside their bedroom windows. This is completely unacceptable. And I'm calling on every person and every group that has decided to come out to Ward 6 to protest to stop. Go to City Hall, go to the Capitol, go wherever to get your message across, but get out of the neighborhoods. These people who live here and live out in this area, they're working hard just to make ends meet and to get by and to live their lives. They don't need the extra complications of you doing your war games or whatever the heck it is you think you're doing out here in our neighborhoods. They don't need it happening out here. And you need to stop. It's not appropriate, it's not safe. The first meeting that I had when I started to come back from my health situation was with Chief Womack and the city attorney and the city manager to talk about this very situation. And I asked them then, I challenged them then to step up efforts to curb this behavior. And I'm hoping that the city manager and perhaps all 3 of them are willing to say a few words tonight about some of the challenges that we face in dealing with these situations and some of the techniques and plans that they have in place to help curb this, because it's got to stop. And I'm calling on it for it to stop tonight. And the people who are coming out here that's the easiest way to stop it. Just stop coming. Just stop coming. This is a neighborhood. This is not the Capitol. But I'd also like to hear from our staff tonight on anything they want to share on our conversation or follow-up that they've had. I know there have been some law changes regarding protests and different things, And so I'd be interested to hear from the chief on his thoughts on the situation as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Counselor. With your permission, we'll have them speak under the city manager's portion. And thank you very much. We're really glad you're feeling better. Sure looking better. You really do. You look a lot better, like you must feel a lot better. We're really pleased you're back in the saddle.
Thank you. I'm feeling much better. I still
Great.
have a ways to go, but I'm doing much better.
Yeah, it was pretty scary stuff. Anyone else? Counselor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. I want to repeat what you said to Councilor Hoy. I'm glad you're looking better, and I'm sorry you had to go through this. I also want to reinforce what Councilor Hoy has said about the protest in his ward, in his neighborhood. Same thing on the same continuum happened in my ward at Bush's Pasture Park several times. That same thing. There are people who are here who really are interfering with the peaceful use of the park, interfering with the use of the neighborhood, and it's got to stop. And I agree with Councilor White. Just don't come out, people on either side of the issue. It's deplorable. Then I want to speak to what Councilor Phillips, I should say Dr. Phillips said. He cited the statistics that I was going to cite, but he didn't cite one of that. There were 4,700 plus new cases yesterday. That's a huge amount. So I'm imploring the people, don't just think of yourself, think of others. And if you can't think of the general public and how it's good, think of people you know. For example, my 91-year-old father-in-law lives with me. He's very compromised. I'm doing everything I can to protect him because I love him. There are people in your families, in your neighborhood, of your friends that you love and you need to protect. A little sacrifice from you, put on a mask, get vaccinated, is avoiding large consequences that are coming down the pike at us if we don't do something. So quit thinking of yourself, think of others, think of those you love, sacrifice a little bit for the general good of your family and the people who surround you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Nordyke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to make some comments as well about the protests that are happening out in the Planned Parenthood area. Even though it doesn't happen in my ward, when you see hateful actions and violent activity in any part of our city, it is extremely bothersome and frankly unacceptable to all of us. It's, as Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so I will look forward to hearing from our police chief tonight. I want to know what we are doing to ensure that we are following the established priorities of our police department. Our established priorities of this department is first and foremost to prevent or stop violence. Prevent or stop violence. And that is not what I'm hearing is happening. And that unfortunately violence is happening at these events. So, you know, without being a law enforcement officer and without being present, I'm still faced with the reality that we have a lot of people who are upset about how protests are being handled. I'm a big believer in peaceful political protest, and I don't have a problem with peaceful protest. But again, what I keep hearing through the grapevine is that we are anything but at this point. And I worry that that's just going to bring even more individuals who are not frankly interested in protest, but interested in getting away with whatever they think they can get away with. So it's about sending a clear message to anyone who's going to violate even the small things. For example, noise ordinances. Are the protesters violating the noise ordinances? Are any citations being issued? Do they have to get a permit for any of the activity that's happening out by the Planned Parenthood area? I appreciate the report from the city manager indicating that the police department is going out and talking to the neighbors. And it's deeply distressing to me to hear that these folks, through no act of their own, through no intention of their own, are being impacted by it. They're being impacted by the mace, the paintballs, just the sheer intimidation factor of having unlawful groups pushing back. I know that some arrests have been made in the past, and I think that's important to send a message that our laws are going to be enforced, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum. I just don't see any support or any belief in going beyond a peaceful protest. So I'll look forward to asking some questions about that tonight. I do want to shift gears briefly to move away from what can be considered acts of hate to acts of love that happened. On Saturday, August 21, about 1,000 people turned out to celebrate the 2021 Capitol Pride in the Park Festival. They had mandatory masks, and from everything that I have read and heard about, because I was out visiting family out of town that day, this was an event for real joy. And I really appreciate the support from several of my city councilors at our last meeting in supporting this group and helping to waive some of the costs so that this group can focus on doing what it does best, delivering joy and demonstrating that love is love. So I find it's such a fascinating dichotomy that at the same time, we have the Church of the Planned Parenthood group, but in a different part of the city, we had an outstanding Capitol Pride event in the park. So I urge people to find opportunities for joy, because there are plenty of opportunities for all of us to be collectively and mentally impacted by what we're seeing around us, like the number of COVID deaths that we're seeing, the number of COVID cases we are seeing. But do stop and take a moment to find moments of joy, because they are out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Vanessa. This is your last comment. Is something that I can just kind of piggyback on and take off, because this is something that's been weighing on me and that I'm wanting to communicate to the community. So I wanted to take some time today to share a little bit about me and my lifelong struggle with mental health. And that has been a long struggle with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and at times even suicidal ideation. Now, some of these are daily struggles for me, and some of them are more situational. And there are things that I have to do every day in order to ensure that I stay healthy mentally. Things like taking my medication or getting outside and exercising, to getting outside and just being with things I love, which are plants. If anybody knows me, I got to get my hands in the dirt sometimes, and that helps. There's things that I do on a more like a weekly basis or monthly basis, and that is talking to my counselor and journaling to help process my life now and in the past. And I also have a team, and that team consists of a few really close friends who know my story and who support me, my husband and my kids, and a team of doctors. I kid you not. And this team really helps me when the daily things, the proactive things that I do to stay healthy mentally, when those things start to slip and it's not enough, my team comes into play and they really help me adjust and get back to where I feel more comfortable and healthiest. So the reason I bring this up is actually two reasons. Earlier this month, I was at the Highland Neighborhood Association meeting, and we were having a really robust conversation about the unhoused crisis here in Salem and the effects on our neighborhoods. And at the end of the meeting, a woman spoke up and started talking about really destigmatizing and normalizing the conversation around mental health. And that really stuck with me as I was leaving there. And I realized that over the past decade, I've done a lot internally and personally to come to grips with my mental illness and what it takes for me to stay healthy. And of course, since I have kiddos, a lot of this is passed on genetically through our genetics, and then also through just generational trauma. And so we have become really great about talking about mental health in our homes and with our kids. But I haven't really taken it farther than that. And I noticed that the reason that set hard with me in that meeting was that now I'm a city councilor. and I have a certain responsibility to my community, and I want to lead by example and be vulnerable and honest with all the folks that I represent here in my ward and also in the city. So I hope that by me talking about this tonight, it just is that step that we all need to further just normalize this conversation. And the second reason I wanted to talk about it is the piling on effect. And sadly, this week was a really great example of that, not only with COVID cases and the Delta variant, but also with Afghanistan and Haiti and a million other things that are coming at us right now. And it's exhausting, right? How are we supposed to take the cares and the sorrows of the world into our everyday lives and still maintain balance and health? And I'm not sure that our minds are ready for that as far as our evolution is concerned right now. You know, over the past year and a half, we've been evaluating risk on a daily basis for ourselves, for our kids, for our families and our communities, and it is mentally and emotionally exhausting. We've also had political and social unrest. We've had wildfires and ice storms and our continued crisis with homelessness. We've had economic hardship. We've had isolation and loneliness. And we have had anger and resentment and fear and scarcity. And I guess tonight I just wanted to give people permission to not be okay. Because I'm not okay. Honestly, I haven't talked to anybody who's okay right now. And I hope that by being honest about this and talking about it, that knowledge that you're not alone, that you have support, will help give you encouragement to get through. Because we're not done. Like Councilor Phillip was talking about, this isn't over, not by a long shot. So I want people to know that you're not alone. I want to encourage you to reach out to trusted people in your life and talk about this. And if you so feel moved by this, to talk about it with your kids and to talk about it at your place of work and with your friend groups. And together we can bring this up to the level that it needs to be, where it's normalized and destigmatized. And I also want to say that if you are one of those folks who are struggling with suicidal thoughts tonight, know that you're not alone. And I hope that you can reach out to someone. And I wanted to give you the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Sorry, I'm gonna lose it now. That's 800-273-8255. And I know from personal experience, these folks are just amazing, and they will help you stay safe tonight. They'll help you make a plan, and they will let you know that you're not alone. So I know everybody's worn out, and I've just dumped a bunch of really heavy stuff on you all and gone way over time. So I appreciate you guys willing to let me talk this through. I feel like it's really important right now. I feel like a lot of people are really struggling, and I know that we're going to get through this by leaning into kindness and care and compassion and understanding and patience. And thanks so much for letting me talk about this tonight.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Young.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilor Stapleton, for sharing and being open and vulnerable, because that is something that it's hard to share, especially as a city councilor. So appreciate you and appreciate you sharing your story and your experiences. So earlier this year, we as a city had passed a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. We also recently passed healthcare as a human right. So these are nice first steps, but we still need to make sure that what we pass as resolutions is actually seen in action. We need to ensure the health and safety of our local community and ensure that we are in a safe place that exists without hate. We need to make sure that we're not only saying no to hate, we're also saying no to racism. We need to embrace love, acceptance, and safety that allows us to feel that Salem is our home. Hate has no place in Salem. We are gathered together on the land of the Kalapuya, who today are represented by the Confederate Tribes, the Grand Round, and the Confederate Tribes of the Siletz Indians, whose relationships with this land continue to this day. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in the community. We acknowledge that our city's history, like many others, is fundamentally tied to the first colonial developments in the Willamette Valley. First, we respectfully acknowledge and honor the past, present, and future Indigenous communities who make up and live in and around Salem. I strongly urge you all to do more than just a land acknowledgement. Consider learning more about the land that you reside in and recognizing the work and activities of our Indigenous people. I have 3 short announcements. This past weekend, my nonprofit, Micronesian Islander Community, or MIC, held its second back-to-school resource and health fair at Chemeketa Community College. We registered 80 households, which ended up serving 442 individuals. I want to say a very special thank you to Chemeketa Community College and community partners for their support in making this happen. At this event, we were able to provide 43 COVID-19 vaccines to our Micronesian communities. A moment ago, Councillor Dr. Phillips brought up his concerns and what he's been seeing happening within the community relating to COVID. He's on the front line. He sees this in the hospital. On my end, my organization has also seen an increase of COVID-19 rates. We are providing social wraparound support services. There's been an increase in the number of people who've been hospitalized. And while not everyone who's watching today may have been personally affected by COVID-19, someone in the community has been. People have been sick, hospitalized, and people are dying. So please take the necessary precautions and please take the risk of getting COVID-19 serious. And last, I'd like to remind everyone that, it's almost time for school again in a few weeks. Salem Keizer School District is hosting a series of virtual meetings to share information about the upcoming school year. There's actually one happening tonight, actually started about 30 minutes ago, for English-speaking families. And there'll be different ones in other languages throughout the week. Please visit the Salem Keizer School District webpage for details on the virtual meetings that are coming up this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Councillor Lewis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't really prepared to say anything. I'm not sure how this will go, but I want to comment on Virginia's statements. And what stands out to me right now is your courage, and you should take heart with that. Melt it if you can. But I also want to mention the team that you say is around you. I've been on this council for 6.5 years, and regardless of the philosophical differences we have as human beings, we are a group, a support system. And I wish that you would see that, to grow that support system that you so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Councillor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. Zamanu Jose Da. So I always introduce myself in multiple languages to highlight our city's longtime diversity. And today I spoke Pashto, which is one of Afghanistan's main languages, because of the crisis that's happening there as we meet here today. So I'm praying for the people of Afghanistan, especially the women and children. And Salem for Refugees, based here in Salem, local nonprofit, announced Salem will most likely be welcoming some of the families from that crisis. We have a hard time taking care of our veterans, our unhoused, and many other disadvantaged communities, but it's going to be up to us, the people of the city of Salem, to help plug them in and get them integrated into our community. And just lastly, I want to encourage everyone to keep an eye out for the 2020 census results. The updated data is coming out, and Salem now has a population of 175,535, which is 20,000 more than 2010. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilors, I have a few items before I ask Chief Womack to speak to the issue that was raised by several councilors. First, you'll soon be receiving from Gretchen Bennett a dashboard, the summary of actions the city has taken to help our unsheltered neighbors and residents. This is information that has been requested by council. It will show that of the $8.1 million in ARPA funds that council committed to the homeless crisis, we have spent $3.6 million. New shelter beds, including UGM, are now at 370, and by December, that total will be 590. Safe park spaces are at 56, and we'll be adding 8 more in September. So the city is responding to that unsheltered crisis. We also are taking seriously our responsibility to manage public spaces. The city will be taking action to assist in areas that have become untenable, and will continue to help with outreach to connect individuals with services. Specifically at Cascades Gateway Park, that park is now closed, and it is closed until further notice. Nonprofit organizations and the Salem Housing Authority provided referral to resources over the past several weeks, and we had some success. The Salem Housing Authority and Arches worked together to assist 2 families, a small example, to assist 2 families, one family of 6 and one family with a 1-year-old child, who were referred to services in our new emergency housing voucher program. We continue to rely on nonprofit partners. Another small example, Church at the Park hosted partner organizations at their nearby space to assist people with determining next steps. The parking lot is now clear. 90 vehicles were removed. We removed an estimated 140 cubic yards of garbage and 200 yards of 25 cubic yards of metals for recycling. And we returned 60 shopping carts to Walmart. The park will remain closed until the sheltering has ended. Restoration work has started. Our significant restoration work will begin when the park is cleared of those sheltering. Right now, we're focusing on debris removal and repairing damage. Then we'll move into restoring the estimated 90-plus trees that were damaged or cut down, and the damage to the picnic shelters. And we will continue our efforts at Wallace Marine Park. With the ongoing public health impact so powerfully stated by Dr. Phillips, I will be asking the Council Rules Committee to consider returning to all virtual meetings. We have tested the hybrid model. We were able to provide an in-person council meeting for the new councilors. Now, I think we can return to a virtual format until the disease allows us to meet in person. Regarding the protests, Chief Womack is prepared this evening, Council, to speak to the department's ongoing efforts to focus on priorities to protect public safety within the resources that are available to the department. And as necessary, City Attorney Atchison and I can assist the chief with questions you might have, but I think it would be most beneficial for the chief to go first. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Womack, thank you for being here.
Sure. Mayor, Council, thank you for this opportunity to speak. Can everybody hear me okay virtually?
Yeah.
Perfect. I heard what the councilors mentioned, several of you, and trust me, we share a lot of the same sentiment. We're getting very tired of it as well. There's certain groups seem hell-bent on conflict and confrontation that we wish would no longer come to our city either. So we share those sentiments and concerns, and I heard some of those same concerns from the residents in Lancaster Commons as well. We've been consistent with our priorities. I'd like to just quickly touch on our overarching approach towards protests again. But it's also important to say that what we've seen happening over the past 18 months or so is an evolution of protests. Perhaps a better word is devolution of protests. What started out as protests in the name of social justice with like-minded individuals on one side of an issue expressing their opinions and peaceably demonstrating over time has turned into higher levels of confrontation with protesters and counter-protesters and back and forth, to where we find ourselves today, where folks show up on both sides of an issue, wearing gas masks and helmets and carrying batons and paintball guns and firearms, with no other apparent intent except confrontation and conflict. It starts with verbal harassment and taunts, and it ends with physical violence. That's got nothing to do with peaceful protest, and it's not welcome here in our city. We're working hard as a police agency to find new ways to approach this problem. But it does go back to the same issue that the police have very few options in the face of a situation where 200, 300 people show up armed as they are with the intent of confrontation in a public area. Very few options for us until a crime actually occurs. And so even though speech may be offensive, or threats are made, or people are carrying paintball guns, these are things that are not crimes in and of themselves. And we're oftentimes in a position where we have to pay attention to the behaviors themselves. And when someone crosses over from constitutionally protected activities into criminal behavior, especially threats or violence, that's when we face immediate intervention and need to intervene, and that's what we did on August 10th as well. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context there. In preparation for August 10th, there was a protest at Planned Parenthood a few weeks before, and we could tell that the tensions were rising. We made several arrests associated with that July protest, some that day or evening, and some through follow-up investigations, which is what we've been consistent with doing all along. On August 10th, we made one arrest that day. We're continuing to do investigations now, and I expect additional arrests to occur as well. That's something that we've consistently done for all of these type of events and protests. As Councilor Hoy noted, the difference here is that we're not talking about a demonstration in front of the state capitol or march through downtown streets. We're talking about confrontations occurring right adjacent to a residential area in a neighborhood. There was folks there that when we went out and contacted the community, we recognized the trauma that is caused. I've talked before about the difficulty and the challenges we face just on the law enforcement side. But when it occurs next to a community this way, there's trauma that occurs there to the neighborhood. And so last week, we sent teams of officers and volunteers out to contact the neighbors in Lancaster Commons. We contacted over 60 apartments, and we got a lot of feedback. And we had three primary objectives there. We wanted to ensure the community that we were aware and that we cared, and that we are working on this problem and issue. We wanted to ask them what sort of personal impacts they've had from the protests, and we heard a lot of feedback. And we wanted to ask them their thoughts on the police approach so far, how we've been doing, if they have any other ideas for us. And we gained some valuable input there that we'll be applying towards our decision-making going forward for these type of events. In preparation for the August 10th protest, we did as we always do. So we issued a community message letting the community know that we were aware. We attempted contact with potential organizers, but again, this is very difficult. Sometimes on social media there may be one person posting about an event, but who actually shows up are a milieu of different voices and opinions. There clearly were two opposing groups at this protest, but there were many other folks there who were just observers, or they were peaceful participants, not closely associated with the folks who seem to be intent on confrontation. So it's difficult many times to determine, is there a single organizer to hold accountable for this event on either side of the equation? Do you hold everybody accountable for their presence at the event? It's very challenging as well. But we do attempt contact with organizers. We had successful contact on one side, and we had no response on the other side. But we do make those attempted contacts each time. When we do make successful contact, we talk about what a peaceful demonstration should look like. We talk about any permit requirements that might exist. Frankly, sometimes we tell folks not to come. And so we do talk about how to have a lawful, peaceful assembly. We increased our staffing for that day. We asked for mutual aid assistance from Oregon State Police. We had a command post set up at the police facility that we do on a lot of these large protests, so that's away from the scene, so that when you have commanders and officers in the field making decisions real time, we're able, from a more removed location, from a higher perspective, to see exactly what's occurring and make decisions within the full context of a situation. So there were decisions being made in real time through that event. And as it progressed, it was relatively peaceful, even though you have folks showing up armed and dressed the way they were. It was relatively peaceful for a couple hours. And as folks started to leave after 8 p.m., some verbal altercations heated up, and then some bear spray was sprayed back and forth, both sides at each other. And then that's when the violence started. Some assaults began, and officers nearby immediately intervened, began to disperse the crowd, made an arrest, and we continue to follow up to this day. Again, I share the concerns. This is a challenging issue for us as well. I do value the input that we received from the community, Councilor Hoy, and we'll be acting on some of that. We saw, if you're paying attention to the news, just yesterday to the north, similar confrontations and behaviors are occurring. If there's an agency that's figured out how to stop them from occurring, I need to meet that chief. But we're all working on this issue together and being as creative as we possibly can. Again, trying to strike that balance between constitutionally protected activities and public safety or criminal behavior. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions as well.
Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief. And first of all, I just want to thank you for sending staff and volunteers out to speak to the residents after we spoke. I think that was a great move, and I think it's important that people feel like they have a voice and, more importantly, an ear for it to be heard. And so I really appreciate that. I hope you'll continue that with that. We'll talk to the businesses as well in the area. My question for you is, it's almost a rhetorical question, but I need to ask it anyway. I've received, 2 or 3 dozen emails basically calling on me to shut down this protest and asking me why I haven't shut down this protest and why the city hasn't shut down this protest. Can you explain to me why we haven't shut down this protest? Maybe that's for Mr. Atchison, but I think that sometimes people have this sense that we can just tell people that they can't do stuff. Can you explain why that may or may not be the case?
Again, many of the things that are occurring are not illegal in and of themselves. So just because someone comes wearing body armor or a gas mask or carrying bear spray, those things aren't illegal. There's really nothing we can do about it until they're used in an unlawful way. That's a catch-22 for us. And then also, standing in a public space or gathering in a public space is not illegal in and of itself either. And so again, when and if the police move in and there's an increased show of force, there's a lot of thought behind that decision. Another thing we've learned over the past 18 months across the nation here locally is that sometimes the insertion of police actually escalates the situation. And so again, we're trying to make these decisions in real time. If we're observing small violations, let's say traffic hazards, people in the street, someone blocking a sidewalk, not having a sidewalk permit, for example, which you can just get a citation for, no one's going to jail for that, we just give somebody a ticket. If we decide to enforce that during a protest, then it's going to diminish our ability to respond if violence happens. And so we have resources staged to make sure that we can immediately respond and quell any violence that erupts. And if we begin to dedicate officers to going and issuing tickets, then we're not going to be able to be as effective at responding to violence. So these are the type of decisions that we're constantly evaluating as the events unfurl.
In addition, if I may, the chief is being kind while his department is focusing on an extreme event, a protest. He's also responsible, the officers are also responsible for policing the remaining 170,000 people in our community, including some pretty horrific events and incidents and crimes. So it's not as if we can deploy all of our officers to a protest. And even with mutual aid, the resources are limited. So that prioritization that the chief is talking about is critically important to protecting the entire city.
Okay, excuse me, yes, Councilor Nordyke?
Thank you very much. Yes, I do have some questions. Thank you, Chief Womack. I appreciate your time. So in terms of other law enforcement partners, did Oregon State Police respond? And also, were any efforts made to contact Marion County Sheriff's Office? I've done a ride-along with the Sheriff's Office up and down Lancaster Drive. I'm wondering if they were contacted and if they were a potential resource to help respond to that scene and make arrests as they happen, as violent activity occurs.
Yes, the two of our primary partners there that we're always in communication and coordination with for these protests, Marion County Sheriff's Office and OSP.
Were either of them there?
Yes, we did have some OSP resources with us as well. We had a commander in our command post with us with some field resources as well.
Okay, but you still felt like you didn't have enough resources to go in and arrest everyone who was engaging in that violent behavior towards the end of the protest?
We did go in and clear and disperse and intervene in the violence, yes. People leave as soon as the police begin to show up. Majority of people begin to flee and leave. Folks who are intent on confrontation tend to stay and confront the police. What happened there is we formed a skirmish line. We gave many verbal orders. And interestingly, when we were in Lancaster Commons, folks told us that they heard those verbal orders from inside their closed apartments deep into the apartment complex. So they were very loud and clear, very clear orders to disperse. We declared an unlawful assembly, including warnings of arrest or use of force that you may be subject to if you refuse to leave. Many people did leave, but a certain group didn't. And as we begin to forcefully try to push folks to leave the area, some folks don't go along and refuse to leave. So that's where we find ourselves a lot of times, is that when we enter, people are leaving the scene. We're having to deal with the small group that's still there as we're trying to disperse the crowd.
And I believe you said that there were multiple individuals engaging in assaultive behavior, but only one arrest was made. Is that correct?
The assaultive behavior, such as bear spray at each other. So there's mutual type combat going on. And then when we came in, there was a person that refused to disperse that ended up getting arrested. Yes, but we are doing some follow-up investigation based on video and other evidence that we have to try to track down other folks that may have been involved in assaults.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to know, I don't know that terrain as well. Is there any effort to impose even some kind of temporary barrier to keep the two groups apart so that they don't come to blows, or they don't get close enough to each other to have a strong blast to the face with bear mace? Is that possible for this terrain?
Well, we have an event happening without a permit. So if you follow the lawful way to do these events, is you would get a permit. If there was a street closure needed or other things, then that's part of the permitting process. For us to put barriers in the street, I'm not sure exactly how we would do that. We are looking at the environmental considerations there. The owner of the Planned Parenthood property, the other business complex, we've been in communication with the owners there about maybe some environmental designs, things we can do to try to discourage the gatherings. But as far as placing ourselves in between two opposing groups, it's definitely a challenge. And frankly, I'm not sure if that's our duty to protect two people from fighting with one another when we've asked them to leave and not do such behavior. And if anyone's at the scene of a protest, I've been saying this all along, I would highly encourage anyone who happens to be at the scene of a protest who begins to feel fear or feel that violence is imminent, I would strongly encourage them to remove themselves from that situation, go to a safe location and call 911 so you can report what they've seen in their observations to the police.
Mm-hmm. Have any noise ordinance citations been issued to any of the protesters?
No, there was one person specifically using a bullhorn, and I heard a lot about that from the residents there as well. Fireworks were going off. There's a lot of noise disturbance happening. We haven't issued any citations for that. Most of the folks, it's hard to see exactly a lot of times who's doing that, but then as soon as we come in, people leave. So if we're going to do that, it's going to have to be through follow-up.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I think you also said, and this was my question also, does anyone need a permit for the activity that they're doing out there? And this might be a combined question for you and or our city attorney. I understand we require permits for our public parks, but this doesn't necessarily happen on park land. So I'm curious what the permitting requirements, if any, would be in this area.
I'll defer to the city attorney.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So we do require community event permits if there's going to be an event in a public right-of-way, including the sidewalk, if there's a likelihood that the pedestrian activity would be obstructed. So based on the videos that I've seen of that event, the folks were blocking the sidewalk, so a permit would have been required.
And has any city staff attempted to issue a permit or citation or at least a verbal warning to these folks, saying that they need a permit if they want to keep coming back for community events like this.
I think Chief Womack previously mentioned that the police had tried to reach out to both groups beforehand and did talk to some folks and did talk about permit requirements.
Okay, well, I'm just curious because from what I'm hearing from the police, their primary priority is to prevent violence. We have assaults break out at it. And I understand that makes sense as a top priority. But what I keep hearing from my community members is that enforcing even the little things, the little ordinances, the little noise citation, things like that, it's a way of showing that we expect people to follow the rules. And so I understand the tension there. You want to prevent loss of life first and foremost. We all get that, right? And I think everyone fundamentally understands the difference between, calmly holding a sign on the sidewalk and what we keep hearing about out here. I guess my question is, the next time this event happens, is anyone going to approach these groups and hand them something in writing saying, you need a permit, this is your last warning, or we're going to start handing out citations? Is that something that the city is considering doing?
I think we can look into this issue and try to develop a new strategy if that's what you're asking.
Well, those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Chief Womack. Join other councilors who have asked you some questions. I have a couple others. One of the perceptions out there in the community, rightfully, wrongfully.
We're having trouble hearing you, Councilor.
Okay. One of the situations out there, a perception in the community, is rightfully or wrongly, the Salem Police Department is favoring one side of the issue and one side of the protest over the other side. I'd like you to speak to that if you could. And also, you and I had an email exchange a while back about the, I think it was the August 10th, maybe it was the July presentations, where I asked of the arrests were made, which side were they on? So I'm wondering if you could speak to dispel the perception that you as the police department are only favoring one side over another side. Then I have another question after you talk to that.
Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate that question and the opportunity to answer. I recently went back and looked at the statistics of our arrests associated with protests going back 18 months, and they were literally almost exactly 50-50 as far as one side or the other. The July protest at Planned Parenthood that you're mentioning there, we made several arrests associated with folks on the right. This last protest, we made one arrest with someone from the left. So we've been very consistent, focused on behaviors. It really, to us, the content of one's speech or their political views or their cause is not what we're concerned with. It's criminal behaviors.
Thank you very much, Chief. My last question concerns the various religious organizations that have been holding church services in the parks, mostly in Riverfront Park. I wonder if you could speak to that in terms of organizations monopolizing the park and interfering with citizens' right to peacefully enjoy the park.
I think this is a park permitting issue that I haven't been personally involved with, so I can't really speak to the issue.
Suzanne?
Yeah, let's start with Norm. I would, though, point out, as far as the chief's comment, as far as the disruption, that there have not been complaints received by the police department, and Norm Wright or Suzanne Reynolds can speak to the code compliance, civil citations that have been issued, and our approach to park events and park permits. So, Norm?
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone can hear me all right. Norman Wright, Community Development Director. We have in the packet tonight, of course, a staff report that outlines our basic approach for handling, approaching, observing, dealing with any type of administrative or other issue in the park that relates particularly to, in this case, say, a noise violation. We also issue those sound permits that were mentioned earlier for particular events or for particular types of construction that may occur in the community. Our approach, though, is pretty well explained within the staff report that's in the packet today. We start with that compliance first mentality. We move forward with issues as they arise. We do have several noise violations that do get observed specifically by the park ranger on a regular basis, and so he approaches those individuals, works with them, and gets the problem resolved. One key point about the noise violations that people may report, however, it is crucial that as we handle these, whether it be Suzanne's staff or anyone else, that the person involved as an enforcement officer can observe that violation take place. Without that, there's no way to really handle a case that involves some sort of noise complaint. Without that observation, we have nothing as a basis for any manner of enforcement. Does that answer the questions?
Yeah. So Norm, I just want to ask then, if I understand what you're saying then, the noise and permitting of like these church activities, et cetera, are really code compliance issues and are being handled by the park ranger or by compliance. Is that how this is being handled? And it generally is not a police matter?
Historically, I can't recall a time that it has been. We work in close conjunction with the police department, but in any instances where we've encountered this in the past, they've been at the parks, they've been a part of a construction project, and we've got our staff there available and ready and always equipped to handle those.
Well, how are the police brought into a code violation then? How's that work?
In the instance of a code violation, let's say like at the park, involving something with, for example, a noise complaint, Chief Womack and their staff are fantastic at being ready on the call if and when an individual happens to resist our approach, refuse our requests, and starts to exhibit any sort of behavior that would be deemed as a threat to public safety. Okay. And so that's where the police have typically come in, and they've done a very good job of this, have come in to help us with a situation like that. Because at that point, it's become something much greater than what we would typically encounter with a park ranger or with a code compliance officer.
Has there been any suggestion that your compliance officer out in Councilor Hoy's neighborhood there on Wolverine in that area come in and start handing out or making, creating a notice relationship with people who are demonstrating that they're operating without a permit?
The idea of operating without a permit, the idea of an event permit for something of the nature of what we're talking about here in Councilor Hoy's ward, this is new for me. I think maybe for Suzanne, this is not something that we typically would handle. Situations that involve, say, noises outside or noise complaints outside of the parks, they've never really been a circumstance that isn't, say, an event like a race event. We have a stock car race, and we'll issue a permit for that, and we'll monitor that, or a music day at the park, or across the city. So something of this nature is new for us. I'd have to have some time to really think about how we would want to handle that.
Is that something, I'm thinking of Councilor Nordike's suggestions relative to code compliance notification. Is that something that you all should take a look at or want to take a look at, or do we need to have something more formalized because this has become a routine event? I don't know.
We're certainly, yes, Mayor, we're certainly happy to take a look at it, but I think as Chief Womack is explaining, the sort of events that occurred like this last one are of such a magnitude and are of such a difficulty that it is outside of our real training.
Yeah.
To be able to not only monitor but then perhaps enforce on a noise violation. So there may be some way in which we can help. I have no doubt about that, but there's a complexity to this that the Chief's describing that I fully understand, and that is just outside of our bailiwick. We can look at events, we can look at permitting, but the enforcement thereof in a situation like this is very, very different for us.
Okay, well, I've seen the same emails that other councilors have seen, sort of a why don't you cite them for noise violations? Why don't you cite them for blocking the sidewalk and things like that? And I've tried to think about it in terms of code compliance, which is the way we traditionally deal with these issues until they become those kinds of confrontations that involved criminal activity. And I can't find the nexus, and I wondered if it's missing, and that's what the problem is. I can't imagine Nelson going out and citing people in the midst of a violent demonstration.
I feel the same. We'll nonetheless look at it, us and the police department certainly. If there's a way we can help, we will.
It could be interesting, just if at some point, I think if this continues to understand better, if our code, if our ordinances, if there's something that needs to be fixed that would actually help. I tend to agree with the approach we're taking now, but I certainly can hear and have heard from the public that they think we ought to be, I mean, if people are parked wrong, they'd like us citing these people because they're at that demonstration. So I'm really kind of intrigued by it. Okay. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. I just wanted to voice my concern right off the bat with the idea of sending code compliance officers, folks that are not trained or equipped to handle a violent protest like this. When we talk about this, I have a hard time, sending city staff into a situation like that. So I just wanted to voice my concern for that, and I guess leave it at that.
Good. We agree completely, Councilor Stapleton. That's what I hear being suggested by councilors. So I want to make sure I understand and that we can have at some other point, a more fulsome discussion that really goes into this appropriately. Councilor Lewis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a comment, I guess, and then a question for Chief Womack. And this is a personal one for me. I think the term protest shows a disrespect for historical protests. These aren't protesters. They are delinquent, juvenilistic, acting bullies. And I don't care what church they come from or if they have the Peanut Butter Boys badge on, they're juveniles. And I recognize that you have to allow juveniles to be juvenilistic. But I believe that this city has reached its breaking point. I, for one, do not want to see us become another Portland simply because people have the right to protest. My question is, you've mentioned this a couple of times tonight, the attempt to meet or contact the possible organizers. Are these groups, and you said you reached one and spoke with them, but are they so loosely knit that there's really no organization? They're just different bullies showing up for a bully pulpit?
I think there are certain small numbers of folks who are organizing a small event, and I think there's a huge number of folks showing up, associating themselves with different sides that are intent on conflict. If all those folks would go away, it would be much easier to deal with a smaller group who's trying to have an event there at the corner.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Everybody done? Councilor Nordyke, did you want to?
Just one quick point. I want to make sure that we're all clear that I don't think anyone on council is interested in needlessly putting untrained staff in harm's way. What I am hearing is that there were 3 different law enforcement agencies present. They can either issue the citations with that number of officers present, or perhaps they could escort code compliance officers. Maybe there's a third option. I appreciate the fact that we are in uncharted territory, and I can understand the hesitancy, because when you look at our park enforcement rules and the memorandum that's been prepared for today, it was not designed to handle, I don't think it was designed to handle situations like this. I would just encourage our staff to keep working on finding novel ways, safe ways, trauma-informed ways to approach a complex issue before things get worse. But I don't think anyone is suggesting that we needlessly put staff in harm's way without the proper training, without backup, without equipment. And we all know virtually none of us here on council have, with the exception of one of us, has any law enforcement background. We're all aware of that. But we are here, I think, to help push staff towards identifying outside the box solutions to handle a complex issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Councilor Hoy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Councilor Nordyke actually touched on what I wanted to just make a quick comment on. And that's that, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Chief Womack's shoes, a number of years. And the one thing that would made my job the most difficult and untenable was when political people in positions, elected officials, attempted to make tactical decisions for me. And that's one thing that I think that's really important as a council, that we remember. Our job is to provide policy direction, feedback, that sort of thing, and let our staff make those sorts of tactical decisions in the moment that they need to make. And we need to support them, but also give them feedback, perhaps when they're going in a direction that we don't like, perhaps. But I just want to caution everybody that, you know, there are a lot of potential ways to deal with a situation, but unless you're there, unless you're the one standing in that group, you have no idea what it's like to actually make those decisions and make those calls on who gets a citation, who doesn't, who gets arrested, who doesn't. It is, I mean, we're having this sort of academic conversation right now. I'm going to tell you, it's nothing like that in the real world. So I just want to, as a person who's walked in both worlds, I just want to mention that I think that we just need to remember to, you know, and that's the reason I asked the questions I did of the chief. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to make sure he understood that this is a neighborhood and all those different things. And I wanted to take all those things into consideration. And I want to call on those people that are coming out to our neighborhoods to stop it, okay? But I also don't want to undermine him or second guess him in terms of tactical decisions, because I trust his professional judgment. I trust him to have people in positions who will make quality professional decisions. And until that day, until it changes, that we need to continue to trust his professional judgment, because that's what he's paid to do. And he's quite good at it, I have to tell you. He's saying things here in this meeting that maybe not be detailed, but trust me, there are lots more moving parts and details going on in his planning that we're not, you know, that we're not going to always hear about, because it's not really our role to hear about that level of detail. So I just wanted to toss that out there. I'm happy to have individual conversations maybe with folks if you're interested in my perspective on a more detailed level on this topic, because I have a lot to say. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilor Hoy. Your comments are, as usual, well taken on this issue. I think we all agree and want to be sure we're giving the chief a real strong statement of confidence in the way this is being handled. It really is being done right, chief. I think you only need to look at a few other communities to see it being done wrong, and understand that your really measured approach is tremendously appreciated. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
And hopefully people are listening to Councilor Hoy and they won't come back to his ward for these protests, or come to my house for their protests, you know. We all have our challenges. Okay, I've got Jason Greenwood signed up for public comment. Mr. Greenwood?
Hello,
You have
Mayor
3 minutes.
Bennett and council members. My name is Jason Greenwood, owner of Divine Distillers in Salem, Oregon. Many of you know me. What brings me here tonight are the city barriers that my business and others are experiencing. Divine Distillers employs 12 people, and we purchase 90% of our raw materials in and around Salem. Our commercial property is home to 5 small businesses, which employ close to 45 people. We want the city of Salem to be welcoming and supportive of business, because the more business Salem brings in, the more jobs are created and the more Salem's economy grows. When the city of Salem creates barriers, our community suffers. We don't want the city to bend over backwards for small business, but at the same time, customer support attitude and willingness to work with people and businesses would be very helpful. COVID has shut down many businesses permanently. Many others like us have come close to shutting down and are barely holding on. As part of the expansion project of 25th Street and McGillcrest, Salem is taking property from us. This is a normal thing, and the US Constitution states that owners should receive just compensation for this land. The problem we are facing is that we are in a situation where it feels like the city is trying to coerce us into paying for widening of these streets by targeting us with unnecessary permits. In November of 2020, the city did an assessment of our property and told us that we would be given an offer for our property as part of an expansion project, and to this date, we have not received this offer. Instead, what we received was 2 separate enforcement letters requiring us to submit building permits for shipping containers and several 250-gallon totes that are on our property, as well as the COVID shelter that my tenant built to stave off COVID. To be clear, we don't believe that these permits are required because they are temporary and movable. The shipping containers were most recently moved on May 1st. Our liquid totes are moved daily. And I'd like to point out that there are hundreds of other shipping containers throughout the city that are not permitted, including several on the city of Salem property. Even though we believe that this is a wrongful action, we are willing to submit for permits. However, as soon as we do submit, we have been told that we must grant the city the land without compensation, and we will be held fiscally responsible for adding sidewalks and other items slated for the McGillcrest expansion. We are trapped. If we submit these permits, for these temporary structures, then we lose our property, and we have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to comply with the city's regulations. If we don't submit for these permits, we can be fined tens of thousands of dollars for non-compliance. It feels like we are being unfairly used to extend the city of Salem's budget. This process has already cost us tens of thousands of dollars. We would love to stay open and contribute to the city of Salem's growth in the long term. We have helped the city with many businesses during the COVID crisis, but we right now are wondering whether we should stay in Salem or not.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councilor Leung.
Thank you. I actually had more of a question for city staff if they're able to respond to Mr. Greenwood's comments.
Which ones?
I guess the one specifically, he commented on several different things. So what part can you comment on?
We can comment on any part if there was a specific question that he raised that you would like us to respond to, or concern that he raised that you would like us to respond to.
So
if it's regarding the road extraction, City Attorney Atchison can respond to that. If it's regarding the multiple permit violations, Community Development Director Wright can respond to those.
Both.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So in general, the speaker is correct. There is a right-of-way project. The city is looking to improve that particular right-of-way. My understanding is an attorney from my office contacted the speaker's attorney last week and informed him about that the city's Public Works Department, which does not do the code enforcement piece, is preparing an offer, and we communicated with Gina Johnny, his attorney, to see if she wanted that offer sent to her directly or to the speaker, Mr. Greenwood, and she advised us to have our staff send it to Mr. Greenwood. So that should be forthcoming. The two processes are completely unrelated. Public Works Department handles the road improvements. Community Development Department handles the code enforcement piece, and is to the extent that they communicate with each other, it doesn't work like that in the city.
Okay, Norman?
Yeah, additionally, Councilor Leung, an important thing here is that there are active open building permits on this site, and part of the existing violations for this property, which we're detailing in a meeting with this individual and their attorney on September 1st, is that not only is there mention of the storage containers and other such things on the site. There's also the fact that we have occupancy without a formal certificate of occupancy and other matters of that sort that are all going to be part of a conversation that we have with the individual. Again, September 1st. This comes after over a year and a half of working on this particular case, these particular permits and these violations, in that nearly maybe 18 months that we've been working on this particular case. We've been trying at every point that we can to have leniency and flexibility given the state of the pandemic, as well as to work through any major safety concerns that we have with the site, many of which are still present. So that's a brief summary of some of what we will be discussing later on September 1st, as well as with the hearings officer case scheduled currently for September 8th. But happy to answer any other questions that I can.
So resolution of this is handled by a hearings officer? How is it? This is not a council?
At this point, yes. None of the violations would come to council whatsoever. So at this stage, given the lack of resolution, that is our last remaining, our next stage in terms of trying to get compliance with our building standards, as well as with compliance with the existing violations, a hearings officer hearing.
Okay. Further questions? No. Okay, very good. We'll move on then to the consent calendar. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
So tonight we have item 3.1A, the August 9th, 2021 draft city council minutes. Item 3.3A, purchase and sale agreement with Chan's LLC for disposition of surplus city property located at 2793 to 2797 12th Street Southeast. Item 3.3B, authorization to accept Federal Emergency Management Agency public assistance grant for eligible costs related to the February 2021 ice storm event. And that concludes the consent calendar.
Okay. And who is my second on this one?
That'd be me,
Stapleton.
sir.
I can't hear.
That was me, sir.
Stapleton? Okay. Any questions for or comments on the motion? Okay. The recorder, please call the roll.
Councillor Hoy.
Aye.
Councillor Nordyke.
Aye.
Councillor Lewis.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councillor Anderson.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Councillor Leung.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mayor Bennett.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Have no special orders of business. We have information reports. Any questions on information reports? Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm talking about item 6B, the Park Ranger Enforcement Protocol. I presume that some of this is related, obviously it's related to the conversations we had earlier with managers Womack about what is going on public spaces and what's going on in the park space. And I don't think that this is the report that Councilor Nordyke asked back to refer this thing to SPRAB and have SPRAB come with a more comprehensive report. Make sure that is the case.
We're losing you.
That is correct, Councilor Anderson. This is unrelated to Council's request to the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board to review the park usage policies. That work is underway and is expected to be before you within 60 days.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry you couldn't hear, but I think the city manager
Sounds like
heard
the
and he answered my
manager's got a
question.
better take on this thing.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything, Suzanne? Did you?
Thought
Nope.
a good question was coming my way.
Okay, very good. Anything else? Okay, well, we don't have any other business then. Without objection, we are adjourned.